Here's something that they don't tell us early enough before we retire. Debt feels different after you stop working. Yes, completely different. When you were 42 and carrying a car note and a couple of credit card balances, it was annoying. But it was manageable because every 2 weeks money came in. That money covered the payments, covered the living expenses, and still left something to work with. The debt was a weight, sure, but you had the legs to carry it. Now the paycheck is gone, and every single dollar going toward that debt is coming out of a pool that doesn't refill. There's no next Friday. There's no year-end bonus coming to bail you out. There's just the pile you build over 40 years of working, and it has to last you the rest of your life. And yet, most men in our age bracket handle retirement debt the exact same way they handled it at 42. Same minimum payments, same slow grind, same, I'll just keep chipping away at it, thinking, as if the rules didn't change the day they walked out of the building for the last time. But the rules did change. Completely. And if you don't change the way you fight this thing, the approach, the sequence, the urgency, that debt will quietly drain your retirement in ways you won't even see coming until it's already done serious damage. I know because I watched it happen. Not to me, to my brother-in-law, Carl. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September, one of those days where it's still warm enough to sit on the back porch, but you can feel the air starting to change. Carl had come over, and he does that most Sundays, since he lives about 20 minutes away. We'd had lunch, and we were just sitting there, talking about nothing in particular. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it, made a face, and said, "That's the credit card alert. I forgot I had that auto pay set up." I asked him what it was for. He said, "Pest control, 48 bucks." Then, almost to himself, he said, "I don't even know what's all on that card anymore." Now, I've known Carl for over 30 years. He's a sharp guy. Retired 2 years before me at 65. Good saver. Responsible his whole life. So that last line, I don't even know what's on that card. That one hit me. I said, "Carl, what do you actually owe right now? Total." He leaned back and thought about it, and the fact that he had to think about it at all told me something. He said, "There's the Visa and the MasterCard. And I've still got a little left on the HELOC from when we redid the kitchen." He paused, then added, "And the truck too." I asked him to add it up and let's see what the number looks like. So he pulled out his phone and started going through his accounts. It took him a few minutes. When he looked up, he said, "About $51,000. He said it quietly, the way you say a number you've been avoiding. And then he said something that's probably the most common sentence I hear from guys in our situation. He said, "I figured I'd just keep paying it down like I always did. It didn't seem that urgent." And that right there is exactly the thinking that gets men like us into trouble. Because here's what Carl hadn't done the math on. In the 2 years since he retired, he'd made every minimum payment on time. Never missed one. But his total debt had only dropped by about $6,000. Meanwhile, his retirement savings had gone down by over $40,000. He was doing everything right by the old rules, and the old rules were bleeding him dry. So we sat there on that porch, and we worked through it, step by step. And what came out of that conversation is what I want to share with you today. The first thing I told Carl, and I want to tell you, is this. Stop taking on any new debt. Starting now, not after you think about it. Now, and I know that sounds obvious, but it's less obvious than it seems because new debt in retirement rarely feels like new debt. It feels like convenience. It feels like a good deal. 0% financing on a new appliance. Put it on the card, pay it off slowly. What's the harm? Well, The harm is that every new balance you add is another hole in a bucket that's already leaking. And when the bucket is all you've got, holes matter. Carl admitted that in those 2 years since retiring, he'd put a few things on the card he probably wouldn't have bought if he'd had to pay cash up front. Not big things, but they were there. And that's the habit that has to stop first, before anything else, because everything else we're about to talk about only works if you're not refilling the hole while you're trying to dig out of it. If it helps, put the credit cards somewhere inconvenient. Not saying you should cancel it, that can hurt your credit score. But out of your wallet, in a drawer, somewhere that creates just enough friction to make you think twice. Now, once that's settled, once you've committed to no new debt, the second thing we did that afternoon was something Carl had been putting off for 2 years. We looked at everything, all of it, every single debt, written down on paper, who you owe, what the current balance is, what the interest rate is, what the minimum monthly payment is. Carl didn't want to do this, and most people don't. There's something about seeing all of it laid out in one place that feels worse than just carrying it in the back of your head. But here's what I told him. The number in your head is always bigger and more shapeless than the number on paper. When it's in your head, it's a cloud. When it's on paper, it's a problem. And problems have solutions. Clouds don't. So we wrote it all down. The Visa, $14,200 at 22%. The MasterCard, $9,800 at 19%. The HELOC, $11,500 at 8.5%. The truck, $15,600 at 6.9%. Total, yes, $51,100. And looking at it like that, something shifted for Carl. He said, the HELOC and the truck don't actually bother me that much. It's these two cards. And he was right, because those two cards, sitting at 19 and 22%, were the ones quietly eating him alive. Every month he carried those balances, the interest was compounding on a fixed income. That's the kind of math that doesn't care how careful you are in every other area. So we knew where the fire was, and now we had to figure out how to put it out. The third thing we talked about is one people resist the most, but it's one of the fastest ways to knock a serious chunk off the total. Sell something. Now, I'm not talking about a yard sale, although that doesn't hurt. I'm talking about looking around honestly at what you own that you no longer need or use, and asking whether keeping it is worth more to you than being debt-free. For men our age, this conversation usually comes down to a few things. A second vehicle, a boat, a camper, tools and equipment from a business or hobby that's wound down, a piece of land or property that's just sitting there. Carl had a base boat. He'd bought it 8 years earlier with the intention of using it every weekend, and he'd taken it out maybe 6 times in the last 3 years. He resisted at first on the pretext that he was going to use it now that he had more time. And I said, yes, Carl, you've had the time for 2 years. So he sold the boat 4 weeks later, got $11,800 for it, took the entire check and put it straight against the Visa. Just like that, the highest interest debt went from $14,200 to $2,400 in one move. No extra payments, no grinding, just an honest conversation about what the boat was actually worth to him versus what that debt was costing him. So look around you, and don't do this with attachment, rather with honesty. What's out there that could take a serious bite out of what you owe? Maybe you can sell it off and put the money into debt repayment. The fourth move is one a lot of people don't think to try, but it works more often than you'd expect. Lower the interest rate. Now go back to that list you made. Look at the rates you're paying, and then ask, for each one, is there a way to get this lower? For credit card balances, one option is a 0% balance transfer card. You move the balance to a new card that charges 0% for an introductory period. Sometimes 15, sometimes 18, sometimes 21 months. There's usually a transfer fee, typically around 3%. But if you're paying 19 or 22% interest on a balance, 3% is a bargain. Now, to qualify for one of those cards, you generally need a decent credit score, somewhere in the high 600s at minimum, low 700s is better. If your credit score is lower than that, it may not be an option, but it's worth checking. Another move most people never try is simply calling the credit card company and asking for a lower rate. I know it feels awkward, but it works more often than you'd think. You've been a customer for years, you pay on time. So call the number on the back of the card, ask to speak to someone about your interest rate, and make the ask. The worst they say is no. The best case is they drop it a few points, and over the life of the balance, that's real money. For the truck or any other installment loan, look at refinancing. Rates change. If you took out that loan 2 or 3 years ago when rates were higher, there may be a better deal available now. A call to your bank or credit union takes 20 minutes and could save you a meaningful amount over the remaining life of the loan. For Carl, he called his Visa company the same week, and they dropped his rate from 22% to 17%. Now, this isn't dramatic, but over the months it took him to clear that remaining balance, it made a difference. Now, step 5 is where I want to be honest with you about what's realistic at our age. You see, when I was working through this material, a lot of what I read talked about getting a second job, starting a side hustle, building a YouTube channel. And look, some of that applies. But I want to talk about what actually makes sense for men who are 65, 67, 70 years old and trying to find more money to throw at debt. The first place to look is Social Security timing. If you haven't started drawing yet, and you have the ability to wait, every year you delay past 62 increases your monthly benefit. From 62 to 70, that benefit grows by roughly 6 to 8% per year. That's not a side hustle. That's guaranteed inflation-adjusted income for the rest of your life. For some men, it's worth drawing down savings a little faster now in order to claim a larger Social Security check later, which then frees up more breathing room to attack the debt. That decision is personal and worth sitting down with a financial advisor over. But it's a real lever. The second is part-time consulting or occasional work in whatever field you spent your career in. Not a full-time job. But if you spent 35 years in engineering or logistics or healthcare or construction management, there are smaller companies and individuals who would pay for access to that knowledge on a project basis. Even a few $100s a month in targeted consulting income, applied entirely to debt, changes the math considerably. And the third is rental income, if you have the right setup. A spare room, a detached garage, a vacation property you're not using year-round. Some of these aren't worth the hassle, but some of them absolutely are. So, it's worth a serious look. Carl didn't do any of these. His debt wasn't large enough to require it once we got the other pieces in place. But I want you to have the full picture. The sixth step is trimming the expenses. And I want to give you a specific way to do it. Not just spend less, which helps nobody. Here's what works. Pull up every recurring monthly bill you have. Every single one. Subscriptions, insurance, memberships, services. Write them all down next to each other. Then go through them one by one and ask 2 questions. First, do I actually use this? Second, even if I use it, is it worth more to me than getting out of debt faster? You'd be amazed what you find when you actually look. You see, a lot of us are carrying streaming services we forgot we signed up for, gym memberships we stopped using 6 months ago, like insurance policies with deductibles we could safely raise, phone plans with data we're not using. Carl found $210 a month in subscriptions and services he either didn't need or didn't know he still had. $210 a month? That's $2,520 a year going straight to debt rather than disappearing into the noise. The key, and this is critical, is that when you find those savings, you don't absorb them back into general spending. You redirect them immediately and permanently to your debt payments. Every dollar you free up goes to the pile. Otherwise, it just evaporates and you're back where you started. And that brings us to the seventh step, the one that ties everything together, the debt snowball. And here's how it works. You take all your minimum monthly payments across every debt, add them up. Then you take whatever extra money you're able to put toward debt each month on top of that. And you commit to keeping that total number fixed until every single debt is gone. Now, as you pay off individual debts, and you will because you're attacking them with everything we just talked about, each time one disappears, you don't reduce what you're paying overall. You take what was going to that debt and you redirect it to the next one. The pile of money you're throwing at debt stays the same size, but it concentrates on fewer and fewer targets over time, which means each remaining debt gets paid off faster than the one before it. That's the snowball. It builds momentum. Now, there's a question of which debt to hit first. Well, there are two schools of thought, and both are legitimate. The first is to target the smallest balance first and get rid of it completely. The psychological win of eliminating an entire debt, watching it go to zero, is real. It builds confidence. It proves to yourself that the plan is working. And for men who've been carrying these balances for years and have started to feel like they'll never get out, that means a lot. The second is to target the highest interest rate first. Pure math. The debt that's costing you the most money every month gets attacked first, regardless of the balance size. Over time, this saves more in interest. Carl went with the highest interest rate first, because once we laid it out on paper, he could see exactly how much those two credit cards were costing him every single month. And he wanted that bleeding to stop. Now, neither approach is wrong. The right one is whichever one keeps you moving. It took Carl 14 months. 14 months from that Sunday afternoon on the porch to the day he called me and said all of it was gone. The Visa, the MasterCard, the HELOC, the truck. Now he still has his mortgage. And that's a different conversation for a different day. But the consumer debt, the debt that had been quietly draining his retirement for 2 years without him fully realizing it, gone. He said it felt like putting down something heavy he'd gotten so used to carrying that he'd forgotten it was there. That's what this is about. Not perfection, not some complicated financial maneuver, just a clear look at what you owe, an honest conversation about what you're willing to do about it, and a plan you actually stick to. So go through your own situation this week. Write down every debt, every balance, every rate, every minimum payment. Look at it, all of it, on paper. Then ask yourself which of these 7 steps applies to you. Because I promise you, at least one of them does. You built this life over 40 years of hard work. Don't let debt be the thing that quietly takes the freedom out of it. And if today helped you at all, share this with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a brother, a guy you know who's been carrying something he doesn't talk about. You might be putting the right thing in front of him at exactly the right time. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, I'd love for you to join us. Because what we do here isn't a lecture series. It's what happens when guys who've actually been through it sit down and get honest about it. Real experience, real mistakes, real wins, and what this life actually looks like when you're finally living it on your own terms. Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.